Gene Mayle, as I said before, knew every jazz player in the country, it seems. He could always get somebody. I'm thinking of one time he had a West Coast tour, which means getting in his car and riding with him out to the West Coast from the Midwest. And he was going to have the drummer, Monty Mountjoy, play this thing. And Monty was a great guy and a good drummer. Well, Gene was going to pick Monty up. Monty was living in Decatur, Illinois, and so Gene was going to pick him up. So Gene called him from Indianapolis and said, "I'll be there in X number of hours, Monty." Monty says, "Well, I'm not going to go with you after all." No problem as far as Gene's concerned, because he's gotten the names of all these other drummers. So he got Gus Johnson Jr. So that's good. He knew them all, and he could get them to work with him. And I can only remember a couple of guys that he shouldn't have called, but he did anyway. But he never called him again. One was a trumpet player, I can't remember his name, but instead of playing like the melody, which you'd expect a trumpet player to do, this guy sounded like he was playing a second trumpet part all the time. So Gene didn't call him anymore. But at any rate, that's how I got, first of all, to play with Brunis, because at that point, Brunis had played this place in Chicago for a long time called the 1111 Club. It was a little bar up on the north side. And everybody seems to remember, everybody that was able to get into the place remembers Brunis there. Mostly they remember his drummer, but I never was in the joint because I was underage, and most of the time he was playing there. So at this point in Brunis's career, his band leading days were kind of over. So he was available. So Gene Mayle was using him. And that's really where I first got to meet Brunis, was on the Mayle band. And that first job I played with him in Detroit, he had Brunis. Well, then he had a job in Kokomo, Indiana, 3 weeks in Kokomo, Indiana. Brunis and Nappy Trottier, one of the most amazing trumpet player. And I knew Nappy from having worked some casual things around Chicago. What amazed me about Nappy, first of all, I mean, he was a big man, and before we even started playing, I looked at him and I thought, wow, man, I can get both my legs in one of his pant legs. I mean, he was huge. And when he'd go, he always played sitting on a stool, and I could see why. But when he went for a high note, he'd kind of raise up off the stool for some reason to play the high note and then sit back down. But he could really play. He was one hell of a trumpet player. And he had been Brunis's trumpet player for quite a while. So Gene takes this band to Kokomo, and the band consists of Brunis and Nappy both. The guy that owned this club had some apartment upstairs, so Brunis and Nappy and I lived in this apartment for the 3 weeks together. Had nothing to do with music, but it was just kind of a strange arrangement, because Nappy, weighing as much as he did, every place was always too hot for him. And Brunis would hang around in his underwear, so everything was not hot enough for him. So this apartment had a thermostat, and both these guys found the thermostat. So Brunis would come in and he'd turn it way up because he was just in his underwear. And Nappy then, he'd start sweating unbelievably, so he'd find the thermostat and turn it way down. Well, I'd sneak in there and turn it to where it should be, and Brunis was too busy watching soap operas to do anything more. I don't know what Nappy was up to, though. And Nappy said, yeah, I love Brunis, but I hate him. But there was actually, I slipped the cassette recorder into this place and taped one night. Somewhere around here I have that on tape, and it's, these guys could play. Brunis, though, when he was ready, when the set was long enough as far as he was concerned, he didn't worry about what Mail thought. He'd just break into the Tin Roof Blues, and that would Mail would know then that he didn't want to extend the set. It was time for a break, and would go along with it too. So that also, that connection, we made a recording. We went out to Washington, D.C. Nappy wasn't on this. And I forget who the trumpet player was. But one of Gene Mail's drives, Mail loved to drive. He would come home from playing some job, then he'd go out and drive some more. But so we drove out to Washington, and Brunis and me, Mail, I forget who his piano player, and in a station wagon with all Mail's stuff in the station wagon. Oh, Monty Mountjoy, he was a drummer, yeah, so he was in there too. So I, being the shortest person, got to sit in the middle of the front seat. Not a real comfortable place to sit in a station wagon, especially driving all the way to Washington, D.C. But we got out there and wound up, we made this record with Wild Bill. Brunis and Wild Bill and Monty, and on the Johnson Fat Cat McCree label, I can't think, whatever he called that. I think he called it Fat Cat.
Fat Cat's Jazz.
And I thought, whoa, this ought to be great. Well, there was some good music played on it, but I thought, we'd make it in the studio. We made it in Fat Cat's living room. Some guy hauled a tape recorder in there, and that's the way we did it. Never sold very well. I'm not even sure if you can find it on eBay. But that was one, it came out, I've got a copy of the record, I think. It also came out on an 8-track, if you remember what an 8-track thing was. I thought, that somebody I knew had a copy of it on the 8-track, and I don't know why and how that happened. But Brunis and Wild Bill seemed to enjoy doing that too. It was a fun thing, I think, for them. For me, I was kind of shaking in my boots, I'd still kind of this feeling that I'm just a kid still trying to learn how to do this stuff, but that was okay, it worked out. Well, then it was later that we went to Alaska, and that did not include Nappy or Brunis. I'm not even sure Gene asked them, but I'm sure they wouldn't have wanted to do it. That would have been 1976, maybe. And, so it was all other guys that went on that trip. And they had, I think the state of Alaska must have been involved in this thing, because we went to some strange places. The first place we played was a logging camp outside of Ketchikan, Alaska. We flew out there in some little puddle jumper kind of airplanes, played that. We had a guy, Mike Vreeland was his name, who doubled on piano and banjo, because there are places we went that didn't have pianos. I think the second place we played was a town called Aniak, Alaska. And it was one of these places that had been like an army base during World War II. So we flew in on a, I don't know, 737. I'm looking out the window and these things come up in front of the engines. I thought, what the hell is this? Well, the runway wasn't paved, so they put these up so that no stones would fly into the engine and screw it up. We were stuck there because the old plane only came in twice a week. So we were stuck there for about 3 days. We played one thing and then just hung around for a couple of days. That was Gene found some guy from Sacramento named Donnie McDonald to play the trumpet. And he wasn't bad, but I never heard of him before. He had been up there during the war, so he was really hot to do this. He also was a guy that we were about to get on an airplane, and he had a knife hanging from his belt, because that's what he remembered that you did in Alaska during the war. They removed that knife from him. He played the first half, Ernie Carson played the second half. And I have somewhere a 8mm film of Ernie sitting in the back of this small airplane with some kind of jug shaking as he brings it to his mouth, because we did have some airplane trips that were kind of scary up there.